Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I have got the all-new Adidas Barricade 14. Thanks to Adidas for getting me a pair of these to check out. However, this video is by no means sponsored, and all opinions on these, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. And this is quite the overhaul from the last couple Barricades that we have had. And to me, when I first got them out of the box, they looked like kind of the promise of the silhouette of the Ubersonics, but from, with the foam specs and everything else, showed might be like the upgrade we would want from the Ubersonic line. I'll tell you what, I've had a real thing going with Adidas recently. Obviously Sole Court Boost, one of my favorite shoes of all time, and then then the Barricade came out, like the Barricade 2023 or Barricade 21, whatever they were calling it. They basically made the same version, a little tweak of the same shoe for like 3-4 years or whatever, a couple years. And that came out, and I understood what they were going for, and it was fine, but it was just okay, is more niche. And then the Sole Match Control 2 came out. I was like, okay, we're back, we're finally getting it. And then the Ubersonic 5 comes out, and it was just, I wanted to love it so much because of the speed frame and the breathing and everything else about this shoe. But the comfort and the just underfoot was just untenable. And then the Cybersonic 2 came out, and okay, we're back, and then the Cybersonic 2 was unbelievable. I loved the Cybersonic 2. And so I just feel like there's just been a back and forth here, and with the Barricade 14 looking so similar to the Ubersonic, my hopes are like peaked. So let's start off in the uppers. Now, number one, the tongue is padded to the hilt. It is really thick, comfortable, 3 layers in the most proximal portion of the tongue. Really, really like that. In terms of laces, okay, they're all reinforced, like that TPU, which is fantastic. The runner's knot is reinforced. That's fantastic. What I will say is it does have a runner's knot, and that runner's knot goes down pretty far. The runner's knot in these is diabolical, how much lace irritation it gives you. The good news for that is that heel slippage is near 0 if you use it or not. Like if you use just the regular lace eyelet, I really had, maybe like a smidge. I wouldn't even call it mild like I normally call it. I wouldn't call it mild. So you can just use the regular eyelet. You can just use the back eyelet if you want. I didn't really get any lace irritation. It's only when you use the runner's knot. So typically I always say, if the runner's knot is there, the company wants you to use it. In this case, I think maybe if you're very low volume, flat foot, you can use it and it'll get a little better lockdown. And so that's nice for those people. But for anybody else, I'd just use regular eyelets and you're just fine. Speaking of the padding in the rear foot, it's nothing crazy, but it is definitely enough. To hold you into the shoe, and it's comfortable, and it's 2 different layers of material back here, not foam, but just, textile material. And that kind of holds your heel in too. It kind of grabs the sock a little bit, which it's not uncomfortable by any means, but it's just those 2 different kinds of materials in there. That is just, I really like that. It's simple touch, doesn't add any weight, but just adds a little bit more friction right to the sock to keep you in, which I think is fantastic. And then you do get an internal heel counter that is complemented by that external heel counter that goes all the way into a chassis, all the way into a harness, I should say, around the foot, which we'll talk about in the midsole teardown. But yeah, that whole thing just integrates with the midsole. Absolutely love that. I think that is just absolutely, that's, like I said, the speed frame too on the Ubersonic. I think that's the best thing you can do for a tennis shoe, so kudos there as well. As you get into the forefoot, as you can see, huge breathing channels here, and then it's just a textile weave. It looks like there might be some TPU strands in there, but it's basically just textile weave. Pretty soft, comfortable. I did get a lot of bending and snapping here where the drag guard is. It wasn't uncomfortable, I just noticed it, and then once it breaks in, it was fine. So it really wasn't a big deal there. But then I think the biggest star of the show, once again in the uppers, isn't even anything in the uppers, and that is the insole with the gridding for air channels, and that follows underneath of the shoe into the cage for air channels. Look at this thing on the breathability test, and yes, fog does get out of the forefoot and around the tongue just fine, and that's all well and good, but it's the fact that it also gets out of the bottom. It is fantastic, and so the breathability of these things is fantastic, especially for a shoe as containing as this. We'll talk about the tensiometer and the amount of eversion it allows, a lot of push through it allows, but for the containment, the breathability, and the relative comfort, this to me has been this is like the best Barricade. Way better than 18, way better than the 2018 Barricade. It had those plastic pieces up here, which this is basically the same thing. in terms of containment, it just does it so much more comfortably. And obviously you got the 3 stripes up here too on the medial and lateral side, a little bit more containment. But like I said, overall, for the comfort and the containment and the breathability, this is a home run. All right, but tearing these open, looking at the midsole, there were quite a few things that were really confounding to me in terms of the test results I was getting versus like what I was seeing on the outside. Now I'll start with the test results. Number 1 on the tensiometer, it only took 58 newtons to get this thing to 45 degrees. Now I should say only. For what it looks like on the outside, it looks like it should be well into the 60s and 70s, right? It should be one of the stiffer shoes out there, but it's not. You look here, bends in the forefoot appropriately, which is fantastic, that's great. And torsional, like you're actually getting a little bit of movement. It's not bad, but it's a little, a little more movement than we'd think with all this, hard plastic everywhere, and it's thick too. And then on the bounce height test, only got 32 centimeters in the rear foot, which, okay, the foam set up in the rear foot, we'll see in a second. But then only 34 in the forefoot. And they were talking about Light Strike Pro all over the place. I'm like, well, I've had a lot of Light Strike Pro shoes and ball bearing bounces like crazy. But then once you open them up, you can see. The first thing when I opened them up, I realized is my knife got through this a little easier than I thought it would. And then I looked down and realized this shank is not connected. It stops here and it stops here versus on the Ubersonic where it's completely connected. Now, I think with the Ubersonic, I'm a little stiff, right? And so it's not a bad thing that it's not connected, but that's what it's allowing, a little bit more of the torsional flexibility. It's not completely continuous, and so the shoe is just a little bit more flexible in general. So you open it up, and you can see that the shank is molded under your foot. And then in the rear foot, honestly, they kind of undersold this. So there's repetitor foam, which is like a really kind of soft, what appears to be an EVA blend. It feels like Cushlon, like 3.0. It honestly feels really good. And then on top of it is the Light Strike Pro. That Light Strike Pro goes all the way through the shoe. And that's great, that's fantastic. Thing is there's just not a lot of it, right? So, you got 2.2 centimeters in the rear foot of stack, which is not that high, then 1.1 centimeter of drop. So, the forefoot is really low to the ground. And so I feel like you're getting a lot of influence from that very thick, the strobe board on here, it's a foam strobe board and it is thick. And then you're getting really thick rubber, which we'll talk about, and then just a very thin piece of Light Strike Pro. So it's not uncomfortable. And for a shoe this low to the ground, it kind of reminds me of the Lacoste AGLT or Agility 23 Ultra in that it's really low to the ground, but it's not bad. Tongue is gusseted, I forgot to talk about that. But as you can see here, that's the reason for all those test results, right? It's a little bit more flexible because the shank doesn't go all the way through. It doesn't bounce that high on the ball bearing because there's just not a lot of it. You get more influence from the ground, the foam strobel, and the rubber versus in the rear foot where I think you're getting a lot of influence from the repetitor foam, which that's, an EVA foam, especially a softer one like this, Cushlon, it's between 32 and 36 centimeters. That's just what they get all the time, usually without fail. One other thing I wanted to make mention of was the lateral container here, which, let me cut this thing open here. We'll do a live tear down here. I want to see if there's actually plastic underneath of here. And because you do, in terms of lateral containment when you're in them, the shoe feels out of this world, even with the flexibility. It is great. And yeah, it's not as, it's definitely not, you can see here, it's that little black thing. There's something in there. It's like a little piece of something, but it's not as thick as the plastic here. So that plastic piece is just a plastic piece here. It does not, it's not as thick coming down here into the midsole. That is just a little piece of, let me see here. Yeah, it's just kind of like it's almost like the GT Cut 3. It's just like a little piece of TPU, nothing in there. So it's more just for window. It's kind of like more for window dressing there. But having the shank here and that there, even so, like I said, the torsional, the lateral stability of these things was, I thought, fantastic. So it is definitely enough. I think it's more just to kind of show you what it's meant to do. So I wouldn't call that false advertising. I'd just call that accentuating what this does. But this definitely did, to me, make a huge difference, especially being right on the lateral flange, because anything that supports that lateral flange, that outcropping, there is foam there, it's not gonna do much, but it does add some bulk. And then you have this, plastic piece here, it is just gonna reinforce that flange. So I still do like this quite a bit. So yeah, all in all for the midsole, to me, I do think from the kind of dull, more rigid, more unforgiving issues we had here to this to me is like a really nice upgrade. The only thing I'll say this every time with Adidas shoes, I would have liked, maybe Bounce Pro back here, Jet Boost, something like that. But I would say for what it is and what this shoe is kind of made for, yeah, I'm a fan. All right, getting into the outsole tread of the 14s, it is a pretty standard tennis herringbone pattern. You get really fat herringbone on the medial side of the forefoot, a little bit more spaced out on the lateral side forefoot, and that is flipped there in the rear foot. The durometer comes in at 22, decently hard rubber. On the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, so I didn't get a millimeter of damage on them, but just the feeling the burr had on them and kind of how it was grabbing it was a little bit more than I thought it would be. It just, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like the quality of how the burr was on it. I've just done these so many times, you can kind of just tell. It was like a little bit more grabby. And what I think the reason is, this is such like slippery tread. Like when these are new, like this is a sliding first shoe to me. It definitely needs, once it breaks in and that rubber starts to kind of get, a little more aggro crag, it starts to get little defects in it, that's when it starts to grab better. So you take it out of the box and it just feels, it feels slick, and you go on court, you can really kind of scuff them on court. So they'll pretty much do whatever you feel like. This like I said, if you're someone that is more of a pivot and go, right, wants a little bit more sharp bite type traction, you're definitely gonna want to break these in, just by maybe hitting cross court or whatever, doing some volleys, whatever, just get used to that traction, because light traction, that rubber, this outsole compound they use, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of different things in this for how light this rubber is. It definitely wants to be broken in a little bit. So just make sure you watch out for that. Other than that, it's pretty standard decoupled outsole tread. All right, but what is by far my favorite personal, we'll call it upgrade to the Barricades, would be its fit. These are much more forgiving than the previous ones. Number one, they have a 10-degree inflare, that's pretty standard. Then 28.8 centimeters of usable length, which is, once again, pretty standard. And then 9.8 centimeters of metatarsal width, which is pretty standard, but maybe just a hair on the more forgiving side. And then 9.7 centimeters of toe box width, so you do lose 1 millimeter there. And a 38-degree taper, which is pretty standard. These fit pretty standard, right? So, versus some of the old Barricades where, man, they just needed a lot of break-in. Some with a high arch foot, it was really tough. I mean, there were a lot of caveats to getting into that shoe, whereas in this one, it's just a pretty standard fitting shoe, which to me is like, just screaming from the rooftops. That is awesome. So I'd say narrow medium foot, go true to size. A 2E, you can go true to size. It's gonna be a little tough to break in, but going up 1/2 size is not a big deal on these things. So I'd say if you're a 2E, you're concerned at all, especially this little plastic clip. I did kind of feel this a little bit with this little plastic clip. I didn't feel the clip. I felt the bulk there, right? In the uppers. And so, yeah, I did say a 2E, just go up 1/2 size. A 4E, I think try to go up 1/2 size on these things and break them in, unless you do have a Taylor's bunion or a bunion, then I just say just go up 1 size. Next, in terms of the snake bitten foot, okay. In terms of heel pain, yes. In terms of arch pain, yes. Forefoot pain, orthotic. Or a teardrop pad, something. And speaking of offloading that forefoot, or really any other customizations on your shoes to make them more comfortable, you can check out my comprehensive shoe customization ebook. I'll leave it linked down below. It shows you a bunch of different techniques tailored to different foot types and different, wants and needs to offload forefoot, midfoot, rear foot to make the shoe more comfortable and more performance first for you. I think when these are new, the Light Strike Pro is gonna be fine. Light Strike Pro to me, is like, it's like Zoom X, like a little nicer, It's definitely a premium thermoplastic foam. I mean, it's no joke. But it is light though too. right? So if this were like Light Boost or Jet Boost and it was this small of a slab, I would just say it's a low to the ground shoe that's good for ball of foot pain, and that's a unicorn, that's great. But with this, eventually it's a thermoplastic, right? This is TPEE, at least I think it's TPEE, but TPEE, TPE, Pebex, they're all kind of in that same family where, yeah, for a while they're gonna resist, but then once they do start coming down, put an orthotic on there, and like I said, you should be just fine. To me, like I said in the beginning of the video, is this the promise of the Ubersonic, the silhouette of the Ubersonic, but with the comfort and more performance of what Adidas can do? I would say yes. Is it the greatest shoe ever invented? No, right? But it's a really good update on the Barricade. I would say I'm very, very pleased, and it's definitely something out there, people that want that low to the ground feel in the forefoot, but not feeling like you're pummeling through. Hope that didn't get too loud, but doesn't feel like you're pummeling through the ground too. So I'm gonna be excited to see kind of in the next year or so what these do and how people like them, because I think it's gonna get, it's a lot more, it's gonna be a lot more well received. No, they're not like the flashiest looking things, but who cares? You know, I think it's, yeah, I think it was a good learning from the Ubersonic as well as from the old Barricade, right? Because the silhouette of these look more like the older Barricades, right? You know, versus, you know, the Barricade, what is it, 21, 23, and 13, or whatever they were calling them. And so I kind of like that too, just kind of more the heritage of the Barricade kind of coming through. So yeah, like it very much, like the update very much. And if you do want to check out a couple other really interesting new releases that just came out, both for very different reasons, the On Roger Pro Fire, I'll leave that linked right here, and the K-Swiss K-Frame Rublo, I'll leave that linked right here. And make sure you subscribe down below. I'll see you in the next video.